Welcome to Off the Clock, the webcast of employment attorneys at Miller Johnson, where we discuss what is happening in the HR world and provide practical insight and advice.
Hi, this is Rebecca Strauss with Miller Johnson. Normally you see me here with my colleague and friend Sarah Willey. Today we have a special guest with us. It will just be me and my friend Shawn Premer, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer with Consumers Credit Union, an employer of about 400 employees. We asked Shawn to join the podcast today because Consumers Credit Union has aligned strategic business objectives with legal compliance in a way that the legal compliance is completely invisible. Or maybe another way to say it is it just feels organic with the culture and the processes that Consumers Credit Union has worked into its DNA. So with that, Shawn, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
We're very glad that you're here. First of all, tell us a little bit about your workplace, your employees, whatever you'd like folks to know.
Well, our workplace is amazing, and Consumers really focuses on creating a great experience, not only for our employees, but also our members. So in order to do that, you have to build a great culture where people love coming to work. You know, we all know that, happy employees make happy customers, and we call our customers members, but that's really our focus as an organization. So it's really taking time each day to look at everything the employee touches and making sure that they have a great experience. And, we've been recognized with some amazing awards, best of the best medium-sized company for a couple of years with 101 Best and Brightest, national winners on that award as well. So, we just work hard at it every day, and then it becomes, easier and more natural as it becomes more ingrained. So,
how do you work in legal compliance? Because I'm a lawyer, after all, right? So, sorry, true confessions of a lawyer.
True confessions.
But I am. So that takes up a lot of my day, right? Thinking about laws, thinking about compliance, helping HR achieve compliance. Listeners to the show listen to Sarah and I, and we're usually talking about compliance, right? And how to be compliant. But then when they take that back to their organizations, of course, being compliant, unless you're a law firm, is not the reason you're in business.
Right.
Right? And so HR folks have to take what we say either on the phone or on the show, and then try to figure out how to achieve their strategic business objectives without letting the lawyer's advice or compliance feel like it's dominating or getting in the way. And I think that you and Consumers Credit Union are the gold standard in that area. So can you talk a little bit about how you manage compliance without letting it be in the way?
Yeah, I think most importantly for us, it boils down to having a great culture. And when you have a great culture and you build everything from application process to exit process around that great culture, it's much easier to have compliance be part of that. So, if I look at, when a new person comes into our organization and the steps we take to make sure that we are hiring the right people for our culture. So we truly are a hire for attitude, train for skill organization. And so I want to also be very careful to say that when we say we hire for our culture, it's not a homogenous culture. We want a tremendous amount of diversity in our culture to add to it. And we're always looking for ways to make that better. So when you hire really well, the rest of it becomes easier. So then we work into every process that we have, whether it's employee development, performance management, even the exit process. It's all designed around great communication and making sure the employee is always aware of exactly where they stand in our organization, that they know our non-negotiables, right? We have some non-negotiables, that they know those. And if at times they're not meeting those expectations for any reason, we're transparent about it. And we make sure that they either know, hey, we need to get you to the level of performance for your role, we need to find you a new role, or hey, let's help you find a role outside of our organization as a last resort if it's not working out. So when you build that into every single thing you do with transparency, compliance becomes much easier.
Right. Let's talk about how compliance plays a part in that. Should we focus on performance management?
Sure.
Because Sarah and I have been talking a lot, both on camera and off, about performance management and performance evaluations, which can be the bane of our existence as lawyers, as well as HR and as well as managers.
Sure.
Right? And a bad evaluation or a bad evaluation process from a legal perspective is worse than having nothing at all.
I 100% agree. I liken it to when you survey employees, right? If you survey employees and you do nothing about it, that's much worse than not surveying them at all, right?
Exactly.
So it's that same, idea when you're talking about performance management. And so for us, performance management is not a one-time a year process.
Let's just pause on that for just a moment. So the concept of the annual performance review, that's not a concept in your organization.
No,
Okay.
no. And
That's
I can't
huge.
remember the year that we changed it. It's been more than 5 years ago.
Okay.
More than 5. It may even be as much as 8 years ago.
Okay.
We did our annual employee survey, got feedback that employees were just dissatisfied with the annual review process. That some managers were great at it, some were not. And not every manager was giving consistent feedback throughout the year. And we all know that feedback is the breakfast of champions, right? And if we want this transparent organization where we help people perform at their best, then you can't wait till once a year to have that conversation. So that year, we do our survey in the fall, and by January, we had thrown our old process out and created a new one.
Wow, that was quick.
Yeah,
I
but
thought this podcast was
satisfied employees is
That's
top for us, right? So we threw it out. We said, let's create something different, and we've called it since that time GPS, and it's really all about navigating your career at Consumers Credit Union. So the formal process is 3 times per year.
Okay.
The form changes a little bit here and there over time, right, with feedback. But at the end of the day, it's really about how are you performing in relation to your job description? How are you living and breathing the values, which we tell you right at hire, that's what we hire and fire based upon, right?
Okay.
How are you living and breathing those? And, are you meeting the goals that you've set forth? And there's no grade. We don't give them a grade. We figure like they graduated high school and college, they don't need to be graded anymore. So either they're performing at the level we expect, or they're working towards a performance action plan, which gets generated if that's the result of their review.
So your managers and supervisors then don't have to try to figure out the difference between a level 4 and a level 5 performance?
No,
Okay, I think every manager listening to this is
That's
jumping
the
for
worst.
joy just listening to that.
Yeah.
There's so much time wasted just figuring out the nuance.
Yes,
Right?
and I'm a big
on the
believer
grades.
of pay for performance, but I think when you pay based on a number on the review, a manager is automatically going to feel swayed one way or another if they don't feel their teammates being paid appropriately.
Right.
So maybe the person meets expectations, which is what typically a 3 or 4.
Right.
They meet expectations, they're a great employee, and you feel they're a little underpaid. So you push them up to a 4 or 5 or whatever the criteria is,
Right.
just so they can get a little extra bump. And so we've removed that stress in our organization. And when we do GPS reviews, we also do 3 times per year pay reviews, so that
Wow.
we look at internal and external equity. We look at people who are considered high performers, and we say, let's evaluate comp and make sure we're paying people appropriately. So we don't have to worry about that score on the evaluation, and plus that makes us way more compliant from a compensation perspective as well.
Yeah, Sarah and I talked a few weeks ago about pay equity, right? And pay equity audits and how important those are.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I am a lawyer. I always feel like I have to apologize about that when I'm with people who are
I
not
knew what I was
lawyers.
getting into when I came today. We're okay.
We're okay. All right, good. So let me talk about evaluations from a legal perspective, from a
Sure.
compliance perspective. And then I would love to hear your feedback on how your system just incorporates that
Sure.
right into it without making it feel clunky.
Sure.
So from a legal perspective, performance evaluations are very important, because if we're going to discipline someone or let someone go and they have not been on notice of that beforehand, it feels to judges and juries unfair. right? And I'm talking specifically about a non-union environment, because in union environments, of course, there are specific right steps and warnings. But for the rest of our employers in a non-union environment, there is no legal requirement that they get an evaluation 3 times a year, right? And be given warnings and notice and opportunities to correct. But when employers skip that process, it raises questions as to what the real reason is, right? And even the real reason for, let's just say, a termination decision, for instance. If we don't have the background where a manager has identified the issue, has communicated it, the employee knows, has an opportunity to correct, does not, then it happens again, and then we make the termination decision. If we skip all of that, and on this last day say, this performance is so awful we can't employ you one day more, but it was so unimportant up until today that we never told you about it or documented it. It raises questions about what the real reason is for the termination. The legal phrase for that is pretext. It raises the question as to whether an unlawful reason, right, a protected characteristic or activity, was the real reason. So undocumented performance issues that then someone wants to rely on as the basis for the termination is a legal risk factor. The other risk, and I have seen this, and you're going to laugh because I'm sure you've seen it too, are dishonest evaluations. So not only are the performance problems not identified and documented, but the person gets an A+, assuming we're grading, right, for the folks that grade, or all 5s, or all excellence, right? And then we get to a termination issue on a performance reason, and the explanation is almost always the same. Do you know what I'm going to say? What did managers say? It was just easier. It was just easier because the person's argumentative or defensive, or I was busy trying to get a new lineup, or whatever it was. And it's just so much easier just to check all the 5-zone. The employee's not going to complain to HR or anyone else. But that, from a legal perspective and a compliance perspective, that's a huge risk factor, right? And so with that in mind, how does your process just organically solve those risk problems?
So we do a lot of training with our managers. So I just want to say that first and foremost, that you've got to prepare people to have those conversations. And you and I had spoken yesterday just after I finished manager training, and the topic was organization and performance management. And, so we talk to our managers right up front and say, listen, we care about our employees as an organization. And if you have an ounce of caring for the people on your team, then you owe it to them to have those difficult conversations. And you can't wait for the performance review. And so as an organization, I'm talking to managers all the time about how to have these ongoing developmental conversations with employees and document them, because we don't like to surprise people on their performance review, and we don't want to surprise them when we terminate them. If they're walking into a termination meeting, which you and I talked about this yesterday, it's not even 1% of our employees that get terminated annually, because I think we do such a great job of hiring and developing. But when they do, when it happens and they walk into that termination meeting, they should not be surprised. They should know that it's coming. And maybe they weren't prepared for it that day necessarily, but when they reflect on what's happened, they'll be like, yep, I knew this was coming. And that's how we want things to end with our employees. Because like I said, it's not just having a great hiring process. We want employees to still be our member if they leave our organization. So we want to treat them just as good exiting our organization as we do when we bring them in. So in order to do that, you have to work very well with managers to say, when somebody's not performing, even if it seems like the littlest thing, have the ongoing conversation and document it. Now, I'm not asking them to document verbal warnings nonstop, but it's, hey, we had a conversation. It's maybe memorializing it in an email where you ask the employee to acknowledge, like, hey, we had a conversation today about making sure that you're at work on time every day. When you're late, this is the impact on the organization. And so I really need you to make sure that you're here on time every day. So if it continues to be an issue, right, then we move to the formal maybe written warning or final warning. Sometimes we'll do written warning, final warning, last chance agreement. Like, we really want people to engage and be part of our organization.
People fire themselves at some
at some point.
Yeah.
Now we're, you know, sometimes there's misconduct and you can't do anything about that, you know, but 99.9% of people that leave our organization voluntarily, they were given many, many chances, and it's documented in many, many ways, so that, you know, I always say to managers, at the end of the day, you should be able to look in the mirror and say, I did everything I could to help this person succeed, and they chose not to engage. And if you can tell me that when we sit down to have the termination discussion, then I will 100% support you, as long as we've taken all the steps we need to take along the way.
So you've mentioned two things that I think are really important from a compliance perspective. And again, it just is part of your culture and naturally part of your process. But one is how to document, because, I mean, we do whole workshops on how to document things. And lawyers like to say, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. But that makes some people pretty nervous, right? And they don't want to get weighed down in the process. This is one area, again, where sometimes compliance can feel heavy, like a roadblock, like another thing to do during the day. But it doesn't have to be a specific form, right? It doesn't have to be a book.
No, it shouldn't be a book.
It can be, and this is, I know you said it can be a simple email. From the lawyer's perspective, that's fine. I'm perfectly happy with a simple email, just like you described it, instead of my favorite title of a form is a written verbal.
I cannot stand a written verbal warning. I will never ask anyone to do one.
What is that?
I'm like, why are you writing a verbal warning? It's a verbal warning, but you can document.
I love a follow-up email.
Yeah, so that's how we do it. We document, like, hey, these are the things we talked about today. Please just reply, just so I know we're on the same page.
Yes, and you ask for the reply, because the one thing about the forms that people like,
It's
including lawyers, is the sign-off spot. But you can get the same impact just by asking for someone to reply to an email. It doesn't have to be any sort of magical, time-intensive.
Absolutely. And then I just ask the manager to keep that. I don't ask for it until it progresses. So if the employee does not engage, and we have to move to more, you know, progression in the discipline. Maybe it becomes a written warning, or, you know, they're definitely going to document it in the performance GPS or something like that. Then I'll say, okay, why don't you forward me those previous emails? I'm going to keep those on record just in case. So, you know, and the reason that I do that is because a lot of managers are so good at managing their team and getting high performance. I don't want to know if somebody's got the smallest challenge, right? I only want to know if someone's got the big challenge that they really are struggling to overcome. And so that's where it's, you know, I don't want to go into an office to meet employees or do engagement interviews and then think in the back of my head, I know the 6 performance issues happening in this office right now. There's never that many, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to have that preconceived notion. I want to talk to employees organically and have them feel comfortable talking to me. So, you know, that's how we manage it as an organization, but I know for others that may not work as well, but for us, that's what works.
You mentioned something else too that I really liked, something we always recommend for compliance and to reduce legal risk, and it just sounds like it's part of your culture, is before termination decisions, leaders come talk to you.
Yeah.
Right? We always recommend HR having an important role for consistency across the organization, right? Are your leaders required to clear termination decisions through HR?
Yes. And
how do those conversations go with
so
leaders?
they would always contact me or someone else on my team. I've got an amazing team. So there's a couple of us that can authorize a termination. But even our CEO wants to know before someone's terminated. Again, we're a culture of family, and we really care about our employees. So even he wants to know that we've done everything we can to, you know, salvage. He's even met with employees before if he really, you know, feels like let's give them one more chance. And you know, I love that we're that organization because I don't know, I wouldn't want to be there otherwise, I guess. But so they come to us, they talk to me about it. I'll give them talking points. I give them, if it's a severance agreement, I'll talk to them about that. But I do not sit in on employee terminations, and neither does my team, unless it's severe misconduct. If it's severe misconduct, then I feel like that's going to be hopefully not a surprise termination, but the person could react in a way that we're not, a manager may not feel prepared for. So I will sit in on those, or someone on my team will. But a regular termination, I'm like, you're the manager, you've been having this discussion with them on an ongoing basis. They need to know this was your decision based on how they responded to your coaching. Now, we typically have someone else in there, so it might be, the regional manager or another department leader.
Right. But it doesn't have to be HR.
It doesn't have to, because that was one of the things that for me was a non-negotiable in joining Consumers Credit Union. So I'm like, you can't create a great culture where employees feel HR is their partner, the organization feels like HR is their partner, if HR only goes places to fire people. I'm like, I don't fire people.
The hatchet team.
Yeah. I don't want people to, every time I walk into one of our 24 locations, go, oh no, HR is here. Now they do that now as a joke because they know it really fires me up. But that's not what happens. And, a funny story is I was at an office one time and we did have someone on a last chance agreement. One of my teammates had cleared for termination. I was at that office visiting. I'm like, you cannot do it while I'm here. I'm sorry. You have to wait until I'm gone, because I don't want that to be the perception, is that I came that day and that teammate got fired. So I'm like, we're just not going to do it that way. You'll have to wait till the next day. And the manager totally understood it. She's like, yeah, I need my employees to feel comfortable talking to you. So, it's that partnership of understanding that HR, yes, is there to protect the organization. But if we want a great culture, employees need to know that they've got a resource in HR too for their development and long-term success.
Is this more time intensive than the annual performance review process that you had before you implemented this new process? And if it is more time intensive, did you get pushback from managers and supervisors, and how did you manage that?
I don't know that we really get pushback. Sometimes we'll hear a little, rumbling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's time to do these again.
Okay.
But what I will say is we had an expectation in our culture prior to this that every manager would meet with their team monthly. That you'd at least have a monthly one-on-one with your team so that they know where they stand. Well, some managers were great at that and some were not. And so the managers that were great at that were kind of like, well, we'll just replace one of our one-on-ones with the GPS and we're documenting the conversation, right? And that's great, because then you have 3 documented conversations per year. So if the employee ever says, no one's talking to me about development, I'm like, I got your signature right here that they were. So that's the piece. So for the ones that weren't great about it, maybe they're like, oh, it's happening again. I'm like, well, you should be talking to your employees on an ongoing basis, so this shouldn't feel like any extra work. And so I'm okay with it if they do push back just a little bit, because it's the ones that are struggling to have good developmental conversations anyway, and it's forcing them to do that.
And it helps them, right? It helps managers develop as managers.
Yeah.
Develop healthy habits.
We don't have 8% turnover in our organization for no reason, right? So employees feel engaged, they feel connected, they feel that they're getting the development they need to create a career with us.
Let's pause for just a moment. Did you say 8%?
8
turnover. Okay, is that a current statistic?
That is. It's our annualized turnover post-COVID. We ticked up a little bit last year. We had 0 turnover during COVID, mostly because we paid people 100% whether they were working or not. So I think they loved us because
that?
It's the right thing to do. We said, we don't have 100% work for everybody, but we're not going to detriment you financially during a pandemic where it's already enough stress. So that was our decision as an organization. It was the right thing to do. I joke about it. No one's leaving during that environment, though. But also we created a safe space for them. So post-COVID, I expected our turnover to be 16, 17%, right? Because
the great resignation that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, you just have natural turnover that happens every year. It ticked up to 12% last year. That was it, post-COVID. And I was quite happy with that turnover numbers, given what many organizations were seeing, even great ones.
Right.
So, I will stand behind our practices of how we develop and have those developmental conversations, because we know the top 3 things that contribute to engaged and happy employees is autonomy, which we're a highly empowered organization and our employees can make decisions. Mastery, right? They want to master their skills, they want to grow, and they want to feel purpose. So if we're providing that in our organization and we're having these conversations along the way, complain all you want, but I think we're doing the right thing, and managers always get on board.
In addition to having great retention numbers, how do you think this focus on culture and your successful implementation of performance evaluation processes and lots of other things too that we haven't even talked about, right, that contribute to culture, how does culture drive strategic business objectives? Because I think some HR folks are maybe hesitant to talk about culture with the C-suite because it feels maybe a little, mushy.
Yeah.
Right, mushy. And so how do you get with the bean counters and the C-suite and communicate why culture is important to the business?
Yeah. So for us, it's part of our business strategy. So our whole strategic plan is called Growth Through Culture and Performance.
I did not know that when I asked the question.
Yeah, so it's ingrained. And what I love is we are transparent with our strategic plan with our employees. So every year we do a strategic plan rollout, we give them progress, and then monthly we update them on key performance indicators and how we're doing. So we're super transparent as an organization. So for us, that's what drives business performance, I think, is being transparent, having great strategy, building it around people. Because people really are your business. I don't care if you're making widgets. I don't care if you're a consulting firm. I don't care if you're a financial institution. People are your business.
Right.
And if they aren't part of your business strategy, it's going to be hard for you to drive high level of success. We are not the least expensive organization in how we do business. I mean, our employees, they cost a lot of money. Our buildings cost a lot of money. Our benefits are phenomenal. And so you're making this huge investment in people. So if you're not making them part of your business strategy, I don't know how you do that. But I will say we are one of the top performing credit unions in the country. We're always in the top 20. And, it's just, so we have business performance to support it. So those investments make sense. And when you invest in people, they invest back in you and your customer.
So this is a really tough time in terms of the labor shortage, right? And we won't go on and on about it. Let's just take it as a point of fact, right?
Take it as it is.
There, I can put up slides later if we want to, but there are less workers in the economy right now than available jobs, and that's definitely true in Michigan as well as across the country. So that is a major focus of a lot of organizations right now. Recruiting and retention. We talked about retention with your low turnover rate. Let's talk about recruiting for a moment. In my just ad hoc conversations with clients who are intensely focused on culture, they have much more success in recruiting, right? And so that's a strategic business objective that's easy to communicate to leaders. It's easier to get people in seats, right?
Yes.
When we are focused on culture. Why do you think that is true? Because people that you're recruiting haven't worked there yet, right? So how does culture and a focus on culture result in better recruiting?
Well, your employees and your customers then become your ambassadors, right? So more than half of the people that we hire are recruited by our own employees. And which is amazing, right? Because we all know that high employee engagement can be tied to having friends and relationships at work. So that's always a positive. But I think when you build culture as your brand, so for us, our culture is our brand. Everything that we do is how we treat not just our employees, but how we treat our members, right? And so when people know that, it becomes infectious. We try really hard to win in compensation and win in other ways, but someone will always outbid us, right? So we can't, make that our main focus. But when you really focus on treating people well, and they know that, word gets out. And so for us, feel very thankful and blessed that we have been able to fill the majority of our open positions.
Despite the labor shortage, and the organizations that we work with that have that attitude have said, actually, we don't have that many open positions.
Yeah, it's that weird
remarkable.
that one weird position that you're trying to fill with this, I call it the unicorn skill set that also fits our culture, because remember, we won't hire anyone that doesn't fit the culture, so sometimes that one will go unfilled a little bit longer. But, we don't have any key roles that go unfilled. because our employees do a great job of helping us, bring in great talent and spread the word.
What are some of your non-negotiables? You've mentioned that several times. Some non-negotiables, if they're violated, you're not going through the performance process, right?
Yeah.
You're just going to be exited to another organization, as you put very very diplomatically.
Yeah.
So what are some of your non-negotiables that might be different than what other organizations have?
Yeah, well, one of the big ones is on your very first day of working for consumers, you'll sit in the room with the executive team, and our CEO will say to you, if you ever decide you don't want to work here, talk about someone as if they're not in the room. So we do not allow gossip and negative water cooler talk. I should know that if I have an interaction that's challenging with someone, because we all have those, right, that they're not telling all 500 people in our organization about that. And we feel confident that that's happening. So, I think when you work somewhere that you feel welcomed and belonging, and you can feel comfortable knowing that some days you'll have a bad day, but not everybody's going to know that. That's one of the big ones. And the other ones are really just honesty, integrity. You have to always do the right thing. And our CEO will say there's never anything good that comes out of a lie. Never. So be honest, even if it's at a fault, and just treat people how you want to be treated.
One of my takeaways from this conversation, I have many, by the way, but one of them is that you treat your employees like your members. And again, in your organization, members are customers, right?
Yeah.
Just to make sure our language is clear. So for most folks that think of their customers or clients, you treat your employees like your customers and clients. And even after they exit the organization, you want the experience to be positive enough that they would continue being a customer, client, or referral source.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is the gold standard. Thank you so much for being with us today, Shawn. I know everyone that listened or watched learned so much from you.
Oh, thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to be here.